Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Boy oh boy have I been a busy bee today. Wow, what a weird intro. I've been pretty busy today guys, but I will squeeze out a questions and answers for you. I've got like a little collab thing for the next draft building coming up later on tonight as well, so I wanted to put this out nice and early. Apologies therefore if it's a little bit shorter than regular ones, but I do have a handful of questions, so let's jump to it. The first one is from Casper Lunsbacken, who says, in northwest of Brisban wildlands there's a broken bridge leading to a world portal. What are your thoughts? My thoughts are that before the launch of Guild Wars 2, there was going to be an awful lot of stuff to do with the Maguma Wastes. My reasons for this are twofold, possibly threefold. First of them comes from the other day where I was breaking out of the Brisban Wildlands map specifically to reach these portals. There are actually two significant areas in Brisban Wildlands where ArenaNet have put like subtle hints or portals that suggest there were going to be adjoining maps at one point, or, you know, just as hints to players since the game actually came out, saying, hey, there'll probably be an update here coming up in the future at some undetermined time. So one of them is this broken bridge that you're talking about, and you can break out and go to the other side of that bridge rather quickly. Sadly, whenever you find portals and doorways and stuff like this in Guild Wars 2, they never actually lead anywhere. ArenaNet obviously don't just let you load through to some completely new map that's been a part of the client, and yet they don't want any players to actually be in. So as you walk over to this portal, you'll find that it's just like hitting a brick wall and you can't do anything with it. But that's one of them, with this broken bridge that in fact you can even see quite cunningly. I like that the devs did this. They have bandits actually trying to repair that bridge. If you just watch the bandits there, they're kneeling down, hammering away to suggest that perhaps eventually that bridge will be rebuilt. But also in the, I guess, western middling-ish section of Brisban, in the area of Brisban Wildlands where there's the huge dry plain and that cool event in which you fight three bosses. One's a DPS guy, one's a tank guy, and one's a healer guy, and their name is like some joke about how the Holy Trinity sucks or whatever. But in that area where that event's going on, there's actually a giant bandit fortress there, and this bandit fortress is just like one of the coolest places in the game if you've never really stopped to look at it. First of all, ArenaNet littered the sides of the fortress with level 80 champions. Okay, so first of all, there's like 30 champions all over this fortress, and they're all level 80 when you're downscaled in a 15 to 25 zone. So they've all got their purple numbers there, and they will absolutely devastate you. They would probably devastate you even if you weren't scaled down and they weren't level 80, but at least then guilds would have the option of fighting them all. And especially, I'm curious, now that there's this patch that means that champions drop champion loot, I'm wondering if there's any possible way to kill those guys, whether you would like get good loot from them. Did you guys remember recently there was that patch where Mesmer's, if you're not aware, Mesmer's had a patch recently where there was a bug. Their full damage trait, which causes a chaos storm when they fall, was totally bugged out, and it would do hundreds of thousands of damage per tick, and it's a full chaos storm, so it would tick like 5 times or something, and people were using this to run like 4 Mesmers in a row, and then they'd all literally jump on the Giganticus Lupicus and kill him straight away. Basically, it turned Guild Wars 2 into Mario. It was awesome. But this was only in the game for a little while, and everyone was sort of freaking out over it. What I was most curious about with that is whether, with this bug, you could then actually kill these champions in the Brisban Wildlands using a Mesmer Chaos Storm. But sadly, I only found out about it after it had been then later patched back out, so I didn't have that opportunity. I am kind of wondering whether maybe you can, like a lot of them use projectiles, so maybe you could reflect projectiles back at them and do a significant amount of damage that way, but hey, it's probably impossible. Anyway, there's this giant fort with loads of level 80 champion bandits defending it. However, you can still get around them. The fort itself is huge, and the fort is architecturally unique. See, if you do break out of the map, you can go to one of the Inquest bases nearby and like do this cool little breakout there. If you do break out of the map, you can go and explore this fort fully. It's huge, and there is no other place in Guild Wars 2 that has architecture like that. You know, like a stairway that looks quite like that one, with a layout that looks quite like that one. And because it is so large and the bandits are only on the wall towards the entrance where ArenaNet would expect players to be approaching the fortress from, you can like totally bypass them and travel around in there without being in any danger at all. Sorry about the bleeping there, that was a render that just finished. So that's one interesting thing about it, but also in there you'll see, just like with this broken bridge that again is being repaired by bandits, bandits are a recurring thing here I guess, there's another portal to another potentially adjoining map. The bridge seems to suggest a map would be located north of Brisban Wildlands, and this one in the fortress seems to suggest there could have been a map to the west of the Brisban Wildlands. In addition to that too, there's an Asuran gate in the fortress. Neither work, neither the portal nor the Asura gate actually work, but there's an Asura gate there as well, suggesting that perhaps ArenaNet were going to have, you know, this linking directly up to Lion's Arch, and it was going to be another significant area of the game to travel to. If you remember in Lion's Arch, one of the coolest things I remember first ever seeing when I first reached Lion's Arch and was exploring it after launch was, or in the betas even, was this idea of that whole gate section in Lion's Arch where there's loads of malfunctioning and incomplete gates near the regular gates in Lion's Arch, and I like the idea that inside this bandit fort, that perhaps one day they were even meant to have been connected before launch, and maybe sometime in the future they will be. So that's the first reason. It seems very likely ArenaNet did have plans for the Maguma jungle, the Maguma wastes. The second reason is, during said breakouts, I discovered, or I was shown by my friend who helped me break out of the map, that there is a huge portion of that entire map right down in the bottom left of the Brisban Wildlands that you can't reach unless you break out of the map and go over the cliffs, that is landscaped in a really peculiar way. Basically, the devs flattened out a huge, massive circular area of the zone, suggesting perhaps at one point they were going to have a city or something there. Like, they really did do incredible amounts of landscaping there, as if something was meant to be placed in that hole, and then it just never was. If you press M and look at your map at that general region, southwest of the Brisban Wildlands, you will see on your map there is marked a giant circular formation that's like the size of the Grove, and many people have speculated that perhaps this could be the second pale tree, for example. Well, if you have a look closely enough there, it looks like this giant semicircular thing, or it's more of a quarter of a circle, it's so large, not the whole thing doesn't even fit on the Brisban Wildlands map, that like directly matches up with what we're seeing on our world maps there too. So again, it's more suggestions that something big could have been at least planned there at one point. The biggest thing that makes me think that this was something that was meant to be before launch rather than sort of ideas they have for the future is that the novels, I talked about this on Visual Wood, the novels for the Guild Wars universe, okay, Ghosts of Ascalon and Edge of Destiny in particular, these books came out before launch, and Ghosts of Ascalon in particular, that book came out so long before the launch of the game that we, the players, as a community, had no idea what the in-game world map looked like, right? We had snippets of what areas could look like from the trailers, but we didn't know what Tyria, the world map, was. We had no idea. And when this first book came out, Ghosts of Ascalon, this was our first sighting of what Tyria looked like 250 years down the line. And it was the first time we really got to appreciate, wow, the landscape really has changed a lot for 250 years. And I remember having discussions online about how, oh, it's because the Elder Dragons have terraformed it, blah, blah, blah. And some people found it quite hard to buy. But anyway, on this original map, this early map, okay, the devs marked off dungeons, lots of little dungeons all over the map, and they all have a specific square. So you can see, for example, the Ascalon Catacombs is marked on this map with a little square, and the Crucible of Eternity is on this map, the Citadel of Flame is on this map, Cordicus's Manor, they're all there. They're the dungeons that we're familiar with from the launch of Guild Wars 2, but there are actually 2 extra dungeons as well that are detailed in the books on those maps, suggesting that these were early concepts for dungeons that the devs intended to put in the game and eventually were cut. And those 2 dungeons are both located in the Maguma jungle. One of them in the southwest, sort of, I guess, near the fort that we've been talking about, which is the Henge of Den Ravi. That apparently was once going to be a dungeon, and we can at least explore a small area of the Henge of Den Ravi in Guild Wars 2, but nothing significant is there. It looked like that was once meant to be a dungeon, and further, far off to the northwest, Bloodstone Fen looks like it may have once been a dungeon too, and this other portal that you're asking about specifically in this question could have been what was meant to lead us there. Now, there will be naysayers and people that say, oh, these weren't marking dungeons, they're just specific landmarks, and they just felt like they had to put them down as landmarks. But you cannot argue with the fact all these other so-called landmarks that they decided to mark off all of them are dungeons. There's not like just loads of random landmarks that are pinned off. All of them with a specific square, they're dungeons. And then they just throw in these 2 random extra ones in the jungle as well. And even beyond that, I did a trailer analysis as well quite recently on the channel, where it's quite obvious that everything around Ratasum, there was like a portal, and it looked like a lot of that whole Ratasum map. There used to be a lot more going on there in-game that was eventually cut out. We know that the Polymock arenas were cut out. There's a huge chunk of land between the Grove and Ratasum that has been cut out. There's loads of terrain in that general area of the world that seems to have left over the ideas of early concepts. The devs wanted to have this as a playable region, and perhaps closer than any others, closer than the Fire Island chain or the Crystal Desert, this one was closer to actually making it in at launch than anything else, but ultimately it was sliced off. So yeah, those are my thoughts, and I think it's quite exciting, and hopefully we'll get to go back there soon enough. I mean, they're focusing so much on Silvari and, you know, that general region of the world, I guess, with Living Story. Hope maybe it will move us there at some point. I hope it does. I really do. The same person, apparently, I didn't realise I picked the same person for 2 questions, sorry, but you also asked, Casper Lunsback and says, will you ever make other class review or builds? I might. I like to tell people, oh, I play loads of classes, blah, blah, blah. I don't really. I'm quite a bit of a mono gamer. Like, I have my one character, I have my Elementalist, and I play that Elementalist the majority of the time. I do have quite a few level 80s, and I think compared to sort of the average player of Guild Wars 2, I've still played a significant amount of other classes, but, you know, comparatively, if we're doing percentages, I spend most of my time on my Elementalist, and I feel like I really have to have a very high level of understanding about a class before I want to do that build video, and I do feel like I have a very high understanding of Elementalists, and like I feel like if I'm gonna do another build, like for example, I was running an engineer build with Runes of Perplexity recently, and been having an absolute blast running it in World versus World. It's not a particularly unique concept, but it's a cool one, and I feel like I understand it quite well, but because I don't understand it as perfectly and as to the extent as I do Elementalist, it sort of puts me off a little bit. But, you know, maybe one day I'll just swallow it and accept, you know, you don't have to be so super serious about everything, and I can just talk about what I've been running on my other classes. My Warrior's got a pretty funny build where I can get him up to like 60,000 health under the right circumstances in World versus World, and that could go even higher if I ever get the money for Sentinel's armor. You know, that might be fun stuff to show off, but people will scrutinize that. You know, when you start talking about builds, there are some really nerdy, anal people out there who get very offended if you don't, like, cover the exact stuff. So, you know, it puts me off a little bit, I've got to say. But maybe. And I've still got more ideas for stuff with Elementalists, so there will always be Elementalist stuff, no doubt about that. Audio Kraz says, hey WP, do you think we'll be seeing heroes come back? Not specifically the actual Guild Wars 1 heroes, but just the mechanic? No, I don't at all. You know, one of the early things for Guild Wars 2's development was that we were actually going to have the heroes. Every single player was going to have a companion, like one companion, and what a crazy idea this is. That was dropped early on, but Guild Wars 2 at one point was going to be a game where everyone had a hero. It looked like what SWTOR sort of did, I guess. And it was like the hero mechanic from Guild Wars 1, but for Guild Wars 2, and it was like a really personal character you had with you, and it was just the one. But ultimately, ArenaNet decided that it was sort of just a stupid idea. Why would they want to do that? We'll just have every single character have all of the necessities for a complete build within themselves without having to rely on AI, for example. I think if we ever see the hero mechanic come back, it will be because this game is dying, and they want to help people do dungeons, and the heroes would be for dungeons. That's how I think we would see heroes come back. And for the record, I did quite like heroes. One of my I had an absolute blast playing through Guild Wars Nightfall. This was when I LP'd it, and if people didn't watch that, what I did was I never used any henchmen at all the whole way through that game, right? I just used heroes, and I only used the hero once I had them unlocked. So literally I was like soloing the game at the start until I met Koss, which was basically straight away, and it was just me and Koss hanging out, and then eventually we found someone else and they joined our party, and then we kept progressing until eventually we had all 8 people. It was very much like a Final Fantasy kind of experience, and I really enjoyed that. And I quite liked that about heroes. I liked the build making aspects of Guild Wars 1, and you know, heroes just added to that 10 times, but it doesn't fit into Guild Wars 2, and I don't think we'll be seeing it come back whatsoever. Derab BC says, what was the coolest event I ever played? I once visited the cemetery in Queensdale because of personal story, and suddenly, it was night, a ghost event appeared and fought me. I've never got that event twice. Man, I love that graveyard. I think that graveyard is so cool, and I loved how last Halloween, we were actually all directed to do stuff over there. And there's a reference, is it a reference to Zelda, I think, that they do up there with one of that ghost, I think, even in particular. It's a cool place, definitely. My favourite event, though, wouldn't be one of these rare, obscure ones where you're like, wow, I've never seen this before, that's really odd. It's actually, my favourite event, or meta event, is the Lissa Temple in Kershaw. And I know you might be thinking, oh, it's just because he likes Lissa. No, I think that event is incredible. Like, just the whole idea of having such a large area where you've got to defend 3 locations at once. It's a lot like what they did with the Karka Queen, basically, but in a much more specific area, I guess. And like, just the way that is visually designed, how you need to have all of the seals defended all at once, right? And you could look at the UI and you could be asking people in chat, but if you just use your eyes and you look up to the great big seals, these giant pillars built into the architecture of ore, you can see whether they've fallen or not, because there's these giant beams of light about, you know, and they're either powering the force field in the center or they've been cut off. I think this is such an incredible event, and there are so many interesting mechanics going on there. A lot of people get really frustrated because I do think the event is terrible for scaling and it doesn't work very well, but honest to God, I think so much is done right about that event. The boss itself has a really cool mechanic where you can't look at her directly and you've got to be paying attention to when she's triggering this skill and then like start fighting, but you can't just like turn around and then stand there idly, which is what most people do. You have to face away from her but continue fighting the ads, right? And then just the whole idea that as this is all going on, you're reliant on these other people in other areas of the meta event to continue defending their seal, otherwise at any moment the force field could come back up and Lissa is unreachable again. I love that meta event. I think that is so incredibly designed, and if that was the kind of standard of which ArenaNet based all their large meta events, we could be seeing a lot of great stuff for Guild Wars 2. And I hope that when they do other mega bosses, you know, like how they did to Quatzal, they look at stuff like what they did with Lissa and expand on that. What they did with Lissa, but over a much larger area, I think would be fascinating and so cool to see. I love the Lissa event. It's so good. Somebody, a Russian person, Anne Glablok, I'm so sorry. Wow, that's offensive, isn't it? A Russian, I'm sorry I can't say your name, says, WP, what do you think on the new World vs. World map designed for Q and World vs. World? I haven't talked about this on my channel, really, so I thought this was a great question. I think this is a cool idea. The idea here, guys, is with the season of World vs. World going on, I'm not going to do anything extensive here, but based on the World vs. World season going on at the moment, high population servers, you can be queuing for upwards of an hour. I was watching Guildcast the other day, and basically they were saying, oh, it could be, I think they got a bit carried away. They were saying, like, oh, it could be hours and hours and hours and hours queuing. I don't think it's quite that bad all the time, but, you know, it is frustrating if you have to wait even half an hour before you can get in. It frankly is frustrating, especially if you're only a World vs. World player, and while I'm not such a player, I can understand the situation they'd be in, where they're really not interested in doing anything else, but they are forced to be in the PvE world, right? And they literally just sit there in Lion's Arch. They're waiting to play the game even longer. That sucks. It really does. So the idea here is that while you're in queues in World vs. World, once this update goes live, you can actually be queuing in another World vs. World map, a totally new one that is set floating in the islands above the eternal battlegrounds, and there can be millions of overflows in here. And the idea of this map is it doesn't directly affect the score of the, you know, the actual servers competing and fighting against one another. So what you do there is it's basically much more of a casual map, and you might be wondering to yourself, well, why would I want to play this at all if it doesn't affect the scores? And the answer to that question is that you will still get World vs. World experience, and you'll still be able to rank up, and you'll still be able to enjoy the general gameplay notion of a large PvE world where you get to fight other people. And as well, this map will be changing an awful lot quicker than any other map, because ArenaNet are basically going to use this map, the Edge of the Mists it's called, as sort of a beta testing ground for new ideas they have. This whole Borderlands Bloodlust thing, didn't go down too well in the community. A lot of people decided that they really didn't like it and got very annoyed that ArenaNet would, you know, basically put live an update that was experimental in nature. And ArenaNet were strong-armed to do that. They had no other opportunity. They don't have enough internal testers to know whether something like Borderlands Bloodlust would work really well. So sometimes they have to just experiment and put stuff into the live game. But then, of course, people get really annoyed because that messes up the, you know, the competition that people are trying to play in. So this is their solution now. Those beta, those experimental things that they have no choice, have to force into live, they can now be put into live, but in an environment that doesn't affect the competition. And we'll still get, you know, extensive playtesting because everyone's going to have to queue at some point, especially if you're on a Hypop server. So I think it's a really, really nice idea. My mouth is wet just because it's a new map, frankly, and it looks like a really interestingly designed one as well. Lots of verticality and cool little ledges and ideas where you could be, you know, fighting other people in. So I'm looking forward to play it. I'm more excited about that, frankly, than anything else in World vs. World, because I'm still not quite wrapped into that whole competition thing. I still, even though the season's going on, I still feel very little server loyalty and very little understanding of how I, as an individual, can really impact the like my server's progress as a whole, right? Like, because I just sort of exist outside of the community. It's hard for me to break into that. But with this new map, you know, I might just start World versus Worlding and hope that I get into a queue. I'm sure we'll have a choice of which map we want to go into. But yeah, so there you go, guys. That's the Q&A for today. Thank you very much for watching. Looks like it was about normal length anyway. As I said, I've been quite busy. Hopefully you've been having fun with the new patch, though. I've barely had any chance to play it so far, but we'll be in soon enough. Thank you very much, guys. Do leave more questions down below as ever. Thanks again, guys, and I will see you next time. Have a wonderful evening.